No, one graduated college, one was for M&T Bank. They made it technology. Chase then graduating the NYPD next Wednesday. Chief, graduating Wednesday. Wednesday, graduating the NYPD.
Where'd you get it from?
He's working from home at Buffalo location.
Because I know
Yeah, but he's working from home. And my little one's at Chapel Hill, sophomore year.
that's my little kid.
Yeah.
He must be like this now.
I'm thank you, 2 payments is done. One more to finish. And when my kids came out, they owed nothing. Thank you, daddy and mommy.
That's great.
I think that way we would do it, you know?
Yeah, but you still have to support him that
Well,
Still helps with it.
way.
Still helps.
All right, so. I can just say it. Oh, okay. I don't have time.
21.
Let's call the meeting to order, please. Let's rise and join in the pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We're going to start the meeting with a presentation from Trustee Meeting. From First Coastal, and started looking into dredging the canal for us, or how to get that started. So we made some advances. Why don't you tell the board about it? I have copies of.
You can, this is an updated one, so I'll hand this out.
Oh.
Thank you, sir.
Might have just enough. That's for you. For you. Okay. Good. I've got a couple of larger scale copies of these, so I'm just going to spread them out. It's just so much easier to see at this scale than any other. All right, so just to give a quick overview of how this process works. When we're doing a dredging project, the DEC wants us to first do a hydrographic survey, which tells how much sediment is within the area that you want to dredge. So that gives us a volume number. The second thing that they want to do is to characterize those sediments through a sediment sampling program. And then based upon the results of the sampling program, it's a 2-step process. The first step of the process is to look at what we call gross grain size and total organic carbon. And if it's greater than 90% sand and less than 5% total organic carbon, no further testing is necessary and the material is deemed safe to dispose at any upland site. If it's less than 90% sand and greater than or greater than 5% total organic carbon, then they want a second series of samples, and these are an EPA dictated series of samples that cost like $1,000 a piece, and they're looking at everything under the sun. They're volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, all this stuff, most of which we never find in this area, even if we do the follow-on sampling. It's just that it's expensive. And then on the basis of the sampling, the material can be disposed at any upland site, or it has to go to a special facility. And obviously, if it's got something in it, it costs more to dispose of. And then we go through the normal environmental review process. For example, is this a channel that's been dredged before? Are you dredging to the authorized depth, et cetera? Typical, environmental review standards. And it gets reviewed at the federal level from the Army Corps of Engineers with input from EPA, National Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. At the state level, the DEC does all of their review internally. And because this canal is wholly within the boundaries of the village of West Hampton Beach, there's no town of Southampton involved. you can certainly advise them of what's going on, but you don't have a requirement. So the first thing we did was the hydrographic survey, and the results of this are on the printout in front of you and summarized in the handout that I've given you. So there's really only three. Well, the good news is everything south of the Stevens Lane Pouillon Bridge is fine. Doesn't need any dredging. It's at or below its design standard. So we're only looking at the area from the bridge north to the end of it. So that's good news. The second good news is that there's only 3 spots that really have any accumulation of sediment that's worthwhile looking at. And I've highlighted those 3 on the overview. And so they are the first 4 stations at the far north end. Okay, and these station numbers, they start at 0, 0, and they go up by 100 foot per. So when it says 0 plus 0, 0, that's a starting point. 1 plus 0, 0 means 100 feet farther down the channel. So you see there's 4 stations. You can see the first station, 0 plus 0, 0, is the one that really has the most sediment, which makes sense. That's better than the outflow line. So, and now the village has done extensive work on refitting the stormwater system. So there's going to be a lot less sediment going in the future, but this is stuff that accumulated before that was done. So those 3 stations, those 4 stations altogether account for about 800 cubic yards of material. The second spot is up right in the port side area, and there's just 2 stations there, one of which has an amount of material, and the second one is very, very minor. There's only about 210 yards altogether. And there's nothing, right now, those stations, navigation's not really being impinged there in any meaningful manner. There's a little bit of shoaling on the east shoulder, but the main part of the channel is pretty good.
What kind of sediment is this?
We're going to get to that, but I don't know.
Okay.
So, and then the third is the 4 stations just from the bridge, 400 feet to the north. And you can see there is a bit of material accumulated there. And that's just, I think, 690 cubic yards, something like that. So altogether, there's 1,960 yards in the entire area. And you'll see that summed by each of the stations. There's a cubic yard cumulative volume. And you see when it gets to the bridge, it just stops at 1960. There's no more. And that 1960 also includes these minor amounts in the areas I haven't even talked about. So the maximum amount of material that you would consider dredging is less than 1960. I think I detailed it on this right here. I think it says 1660. So about 1,600, 1,700 cubic yards of material. So our next thing is to characterize the sediments. And we do that by a system called coring. So we literally take a plastic tube and we vibrate it into the sediments. And there's a protocol for doing that on the number of samples that you're going to take based upon the area you're going to dredge and the number of borings. And then within the boring, you take samples in the dredge sediment and a foot below where you want to dredge. So on each boring, you're taking 2 sediment samples. So in this case, we only have 3 spots to dredge. So we're talking, probably 3 borings, maybe 4. And then 2 samples per. And this board's already approved that sampling program, and so that's in the works. We're going to get the borings done, in the next 30, 45 days. That'll go out to the lab. It takes them about
How
a
do
week.
you get that? Do you have to hire a company?
Well, Sean Barron from Barron Environmental does all our sediment borings, and he's specifically detailed on the resolution that authorized us to do the work so far. So just in the same way this work, all the hydro survey work was done by sea level mapping, and these are all direct costs that are in the contract. So our next step is to undertake the boring, get the sediment samples, cross our fingers that it comes back more than 90% sand, less than 5% total organic carbon. And then from that, we move forward with the regular permitting process. And that will also, at that point, the village can begin to talk about, all right, how much will this actually cost to get done? Because we'll know what the character of the sediment is, how much we gotta move and where it is. And the permit conditions, on a permit like this are gonna be pretty standard. They're gonna be time of year restrictions. So it's gonna be basically, you have to dredge between November 1st and December 31st. And it'll be type of dredging, which in this case would be, clamshell or bucket dredging. You could do hydraulic dredging, but there's not enough material to warrant bringing in a hydraulic dredge. Yeah, nobody can put it.
Yeah.
Nice thing about a clamshell is barge mounted or land mounted, and you can dig and dispose of pretty easily. Limiting factor on those dredges is getting it under the speed limit bridge. We're through. But those are practical issues that once we complete the sediment sampling, we can begin to attack from a cost point of view. And, that's really where we are at this point and where we're headed.
Well, would you do some 30 to 45 days for them to come out, or 30 to 45 days to get the results?
It's about 30, they should have the sampling done the next 30 days, and it's a couple of weeks in the lab to get the results.
They include chopping carts and issuing cones and everything
Those
else.
are excluded specifically.
They don't come up in the core.
We go to a different spot when we hit shopping carts.
We've just done so much in
Places
terms of water quality improvement with putting in those big hydrodynamic separators and now the sewers and the Main Street project, that it would be nice to start with get a clean slate in the canal. That's really the thinking, to scoop out all the glue that's in there now.
Let's hope it's not
You
true.
know.
No, you don't do it.
So, it's really thick up at the head of the canal.
Yeah, you can see, right there at the head wall is where it is. And you go down there at a really low tide, you just see the sediment.
Yeah. And I was also wondering if you could look into, is there some sort of aeration system that we could put in at the head to keep the water moving?
Well, there is. And the other thing that you can do here, believe it or not, and the village has already done this in the marina, is oysters. You can put in oysters. But yeah, there are aeration techniques. They're basically air bubbler systems are really the ones that I would recommend. Some people, like you go to golf courses and you see they have water fountains that do the aeration, but they can be really loud. And
We don't want it loud.
don't want to laugh.
And they don't draw from the bottom.
Right.
They can't go get clogged up, so you want subsurface aeration.
Right, and with the bubblers are really, comparison, quite inexpensive.
Yeah.
So if you have a problem, you got to replace it. It's not a big deal.
And there are
West
boats
End
that
Landing
can
used to do the pilots.
Yeah.
They had bubbles for the pilots.
That bubble, yeah. Very good.
The functional part of the system is out of the water.
Right.
It's a compressor, as opposed to something under the water that's pumped, sucking
Just
up
think about an aerator in your fish tank. That's what it is. It's just a bigger scale. It's an industrial
which is
commercial scale.
oxygen.
Oh, it's not on the bottom.
It's on the bottom, it's aeration stones on the bottom on paddles. So externally, you're pumping compressed air into them, and then it bubbles up, keeps it turned over, it keeps dissolved oxygen up.
So what happens in this canal is, in the summertime especially, water gets stratified. So what happens is the water that's on the bottom just stays there. The tide will come in, the tide will come out, but that bottom layer just stays there. It becomes really stagnant, really low oxygen, and that's how you get fish kills, because the fish, especially the bunker, when you get driven up in there, there's no oxygen in the water. So the bubblers do keep the water column fully mixed.
Yeah, that sounds good. And it won't interfere with the small boats. that come
No. These are, they're down on the bottom. You would do them in such a way that they're close to the bulkhead itself. And and the thing is, you're going to get breakage, but they're really easy to replace and inexpensive.
When it comes time to do the dredging, some of these bulkheads are in a dilapidated or compromised state, I should say. Do you think this will further compromise, or do we have to take measures to avert that collapse of the bulkhead?
We definitely have to take measures. Really the worst spot was right up at the head of the canal on the west side, and that's been remediated. We in fact did that, I don't know, about a month ago. 8 weeks
So
out.
we finished up.
So
That was the
that,
worst, right?
and that's good, those are 12-foot sheets, they're driven deep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
That one you have to worry about.
Yeah, so, you
I
know,
was thinking down around Stevens Lane.
Yeah, well, I think
Our
that-
house.
yeah, I think we should do an inspection of that, number one, because let those people know that if they have an issue or not. But the dredging itself, if you look on the typical sections we have, the object here is to maintain a factor of safety on either side of the channel, such that it's not, the dredging is not going straight to the bulkhead, it's coming up a distance away, right, so you still have the natural slope. And the design slope is such that it itself is stable too, it's not gonna start caving in.
So you're bringing it back to like sustainable slopes.
The bilateral parking lot is going to be disturbed with the installation of the sewers. And